Hello, everyone. Welcome to another day of the challenge. I'm joined today with Tony Rivera. We've done a collab together on Instagram. He kindly accepted to also come here on this challenge and give you guys some value, and I really appreciate that. So go check him out also on Instagram. His handle is ngi.fitness, if I'm not mistaken, Tony.
You got it. Yep. NGI.fitness.
ngi.fitness. And he's going to talk today about different strategies with your training, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, and I'll talk about the why and all that. But what we're going to talk about today is something that comes up very frequently when people are trying to get into a fitness program, a fitness regimen, follow some kind of structure, but don't really know what to do, right? So I'm
Okay.
going to talk about the three most common styles of training and how it's going to affect you and your goals.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna give it to you. You can share your screen and take it home.
Okay, awesome, awesome. So before I share my screen, couple of things on this. Like I said, I wanted to talk about how it affects you, why we're talking about this, right? So I'm a vegan fitness coach as
Oh,
well, right? I work specifically with men, and what I specialize in is either turning fat into muscle or just building some brand new muscle, right? But what's important to note is that we are all on a journey, right? We're all on a journey of some sort, right? So whether it's a fitness journey, whether it's just how your life unfolds, you're gonna learn different things along the way. And so the reason that this is important to me is because number one, um, it's something that comes up pretty frequently with the people that I work with or that I speak with, just generally gathering data on like how people work out and what their goals are. But personally, I didn't know this 18 years ago when I started working in fitness. Right, I came from, excuse me, a mentality of this is something that people say very commonly. You eat big, you lift big, you get big, right? And I thought that that was it. Like that was the strategy for working out. Whatever your goals are, don't matter. Eat big, lift big, you're going to get big, right? And this is kind of silly because it's not a one size fits all. Not everybody is looking to do the same thing, right? So I wanted to talk about, especially for folks who don't really know where to start, what your three options are, or at least your three best options for styles of training that are going to get you where you want to go, right? So, highly recommend having somebody show you, teach you, guide you along. But if you're going to just take a shot in the dark, I at least want you to kind of be on the right track, right? So, we'll dive into it. I'm going to share my screen now, and I have a little bit of a presentation, and we'll talk through the three different styles we'll do, okay? So, let's see. All right. Could you let me know if my screen is being shared? Yes. Okay, cool. So the the presentation I put together here, it's called Power Endurance Hypertrophy. Which one do I pick, right? So I narrowed it down to these three because they're the most common. I will add this here at the beginning. There's a lot of different variations and styles that you can work out, right? But these three kind of encompass the three major goals that people are looking for, right? So you're either looking to learn how to be powerful and strong, you're either looking to gain some muscle, maybe gain some size, or maybe you're looking to increase your game on the field. Maybe you're an athlete. Maybe there's something that requires you to go through repetitive movements. And so we're going to talk about these three things because when I started working out, a long, long time ago, like I said, I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do. I had this like blanket statement instruction on how to work out, but it didn't really match the goals that I was trying to achieve. And so I think it's important to know which one you should follow, right? So I'm going to make it as easy as possible. I'm going to try in this presentation to avoid like really complex technical terms and just make it easy to understand. So if you want to take a screenshot of this or something like that, you'll always have it, right? And you'll have a general idea of what you're looking at. Okay, so which one do I follow, right? Um, Pardon me. Okay, so if you're on a fitness journey or maybe you plan to start one, it might be confusing to choose the proper type of training that will get you to your goals. So the first thing that you want to know is your results are going to differ dramatically based on the different types of lifting you choose to follow, whether this is intentional or not. So if I were to 18 years ago have decided, let's go with the lift big, eat big, get big theory, right? There is some science to this theory. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that it matches the goals that I was looking for, because in following that particular set of instructions, I was essentially powerlifting, but I didn't know what powerlifting was. I was just in the gym putting as much weight on the bar as I could, possibly lift. It wasn't really what I wanted, though. I didn't necessarily want to be really strong. At that point in time, I wanted to gain muscle. I wanted to gain lean muscle. I wanted to be a big guy. Um, and as a result of following the, eat big, get big thing, I ended up just fat, unfortunately. So let's dive into it. All right. So this is kind of a funny example, but I put it here because I don't think anyone's going to forget it. Think about this like cooking potatoes, okay? So in this example, you are the potato. Sorry in advance. Cooking is your fitness journey, right? You wouldn't throw potatoes in a pot of boiling water and think that French fries are going to come out. That doesn't work that way, right? So you can't reach your goals if you're following the incorrect training regimen or program, right? So if you want fries, you got to fry them. We just have to follow the proper steps to get to where we're going, right? All right. So the a great way to start is
Just
to
just for me to say, I love the example that you used. Ve- Very
thank you.
creative.
I think I'm funny. Um, so the first thing is, I mean, and I think this one kind of comes naturally. You have to identify your goals, right? So, what is it that you're looking to do? And at the beginning, I gave some examples like, do you want to get bigger? Do you want to be stronger? Um, are you an athlete, right? There's different things that are going to influence where you go or where you want to go, right? So, in this case, I also put down, do you want to be stronger? Are you an athlete? Are you focusing on creating muscle? Because before you start your training, you have to know these things. It's simple, especially from a beginner's perspective, to say I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to touch a bunch of machines at the gym, or I'm going to do as many pull-ups as possible. But identifying your goal is critical, or you're not going to get there, right? Maybe by accident, but that's probably quite rare. So let's talk first about power training. Um, Training for power is pretty simply trying to exert the maximum amount of force that one muscle or movement can generate over a very short amount of repetitions, right? So we're not shooting for the stars trying to hit 30 reps on something here. We're usually looking at 1 rep, 2 rep, 3 reps, maybe 4 or 5, but generally, especially if we're taking this to a competition, to a place where we're competing or something, we're only doing 1 to 3 reps for power. And the way we train for that is very similar as well. So the goal is to become as strong as possible by executing as very few repetitions as we can, as hard as we can, right? So this is really hardcore stuff. Um, while we're not having a huge volume of movements, again, we're not doing 30 reps of something. We are concentrating all of our force 1 time or 2 times. So this is going to increase strength over time. So if what you're looking for is to be very, very strong, it's going to happen. And with your training cycle, you're probably going to be adding a little bit next week and adding a little bit more the next week after that. Um, Essentially trying to build strength, right? So let's get into this a little bit further. Second slide on power is basically how we do it, right? So if you're looking to gain power, and again, let me disclaim real quick. This is the Reader's Digest, like simplest form. There's a lot of variables that go into training, right? But this is going to be kind of the overview of how you would train for power. So the average set range is going to be about 1 to 5 sets of whatever movement you're doing, right? This doesn't vary, and we'll talk about this in hypertrophy and endurance, but this doesn't vary regardless of like what you're doing, right? You're just trying to hit big, heavy movements, generally compound movements, also power training. In some cases, not all, will remove isolation activity and just focus on like really big lifts, such as the deadlift, the squat, the bench press, right? There are many power lifters who don't, for one single day out of their cycle, hit biceps. That's a normal thing, right? And so, if maybe your goal was to get some big biceps, this might not be for you, right? But if your goal was, I really want to compete, I want to be the strongest guy in my town, this would be the way you'd want to go. So the average rep range, again, very low. We're only going to go for about 1 to 5. The goal here again is just training to exert the most force in a small amount of movements. So you're going to be adding about 90 to 100% of what's called your 1 rep max, right? So if you haven't heard that term before, if you don't know what this is, essentially all this means is the highest amount of weight that you can put on a bar or whatever equipment you're using for 1 rep, you're going to be at about 90 to 100% of that for power range, right? Some power variations allow for progressive overload, so maybe you'll be in the 80% range for your first set, but gradually you're going to increase. Inevitably, the goal is to get stronger than your 1 rep was last week, right? Or last time you did it, right? And just to, refresh everybody on this, the goal in power training is just strength. There are other things that can come from it, but the point here is we're just trying to get strong, right? This is not focused on physique. This is not focused on losing weight. Can it do those things? Yes, absolutely, but that's not the focus of this type of training. So we'll move into hypertrophy training. So hypertrophy training basically just means we're trying to make something grow. We're trying to make our muscles big, right? So in trying to develop our muscles, we're going to build strength at a slower rate, but it is a really great way to gain strength. Um, Essentially, this process won't work if you are not progressively overloading over time, right? So if we're not increasing the intensity of our workout, be that strength, be that weight, be that volume, whatever, it's not going to work if we don't progressively overload, right? So you will get stronger here, but unlike power training, that is not the goal. Like, that's not the primary objective. That's kind of a secondary benefit of it. Strength will increase due to volume and intensity. As I said, some critical elements of hypertrophy training include proper training regimen, focus on each muscle group, time under tension, and recovery. So, this is not necessarily the case for every style of lifting that you do. Of course, recovery is going to come into play with anything you do, but the recovery is going to differ based on what your goals are also. And so these are the three critical kind of measures that you want to consider when trying to grow muscle. And let's talk about how we do that. So, how do you train for hypertrophy? Your average sets are going to be about 3 to 4 sets, right? So, if I'm hitting the bench press, I'm not going to go for 5. I'm not going to go for 10 sets. I'm going to be there for 3 sets, probably move on to the next. So, the rep range there is 8 to 12 for compound movements. And this is going to change slightly for isolation movements. So, if I'm doing something like a single arm curl, I'm not necessarily going to want to go for 8 to 12 because I might not get that much bang for my buck. Whereas the time under tension will still be there, even if I'm shooting for 15 to 20 reps, right? And so when we put these things together, essentially the process of growing muscle comes down to stressing your muscles out and destroying them to begin with. We could do that several different ways. As I mentioned before, progressive overload is a very critical component of hypertrophy training. But time under tension means basically we're not necessarily going that heavy. We're not in the 70 to 80% of our max range. We can go a little bit lower, but we're going to go for higher reps because we're focusing on one muscle group independent of others, right? So this is important to note. A lot of folks will hypertrophy train as a prerequisite to strength training, to power training. The reason for this is if you're growing your muscles, essentially you've got more to work with when you go to be stronger, right? Um, Super strong doesn't necessarily mean super big. But if you have more muscle to work with, you can add more strength. And so, oftentimes, people will use this style of training um, to get to a place where they start powerlifting.
Yeah.
Additionally, kind
Ju-
of a
Just
more
to just to add to what you said is, as you said at the beginning, it's a journey, right? So going through a journey, you might start with hypertrophy, build a physique that you're happy with, but you don't want to grow more. So you might want to get stronger after that. So as you said, it's a good place to start maybe in your journey before you try going to powerlifting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's going to depend on the person, right? So, regardless of which one I think is my favorite, right? It's going to be based on your goals. And so, absolutely, if somebody wants to be strong, but they aren't working with very much muscle mass to begin with, that's okay. We can put some muscle on you and then get you strong later. Um, Likewise, you can interchange the next, and which we're going to talk about endurance in a moment. You could sort of switch out which ones we're focusing on and targeting first, um, and swap them, right? So if you're on a hypertrophy program, it doesn't mean you have to stay there forever. Um, Same goes with all the others. So moving forward, our third most common training is called endurance training, right? So, endurance aims to make muscles repeatedly exert force over an extended period of time with little rest in between sets, right? So, this is kind of the opposite of power training because we're not going absolutely as hard as we can for one rep. We're probably going to be doing a lot more reps with a much lower intensity. Some of the things to consider here is this is very ideal for athletes, so people that have to do repeated movements over and over, um, or people that maybe are just need to do repeated movements over and over for life, right? Whatever that might be. This also is really good for losing weight. When we work our bodies with little rest in between sets and we're going for high volume movements, so 15 to 20, we'll talk about the reps and sets in a moment, but if we're going for high volume, like really high amount of repetitions, your heart rate is going to change to match that so that you can survive through it. But essentially, what's happening is you're burning more calories a lot faster, right? So, this is something that's utilized for and often called a shredding phase or shredding style working out, right? This
And
is sort of
a good example of this type of training, I would say, is CrossFit, right? Because it has that component of many reps, different styles of workouts, and
yeah. So there's that's a whole nother. It's a good example, but that's a whole nother like world of because you can incorporate in CrossFit. Usually, you're incorporating a lot of power movements with a lot of high repetition activity, right? So it just kind of depends on what your goal is, even if you're a CrossFitter, right?
yeah,
So, but yes, that's a good example because generally you're doing a lot of high intensity movements, whether they be with body weight or a kettlebell. You might not necessarily be trying to throw up 315 pounds on a deadlift, right? But
yeah,
it's still very high intensity just because
and
of how much you're doing.
in a short period of time, that you're trying to finish the program, right? So you have to do it quickly.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Very good point. And it's a good example too, because that's probably something people can say, "Oh, I've heard about CrossFit. I see those guys jumping around."
Yeah, exactly. I haven't done CrossFit, but I know that's the kind of they cross. That's why it's called CrossFit, I think, because they mix things up. But essentially, what you achieve with CrossFit is more of an endurance training than hypertrophy or power.
Right, correct. Absolutely. They definitely have an emphasis on power, but it's not necessarily one rep max power. It's kind of like combining the endurance with how powerful and explosive can you be with these movements even if you're doing 20 of them. So, moving forward, how do we do endurance, right? What's the if we could snapshot something that says this is endurance training, this is it. So typical endurance training sets are going to be about 3 to 5 sets, right? We're going to do a lot of reps though. So 12 to 25. This is vastly different than anything else we've talked about. If we're looking to grow muscle, it's going to be around 8 to 12 with a much higher percentage of your potential strength. If we're talking about power, we're almost doing no reps, but it's as heavy as you can go. In this case, we're going to be at about 50 to 75% of your one rep max, right? And this can vary, and this can also change if you're just doing body weight exercises, because in that case, the whole scale of how much we weigh is different, right? But good rule of thumb, if we're using equipment, if we're using machines, if we're using bars, 50 to 75 percent of your one rep max is an ideal range to be in. And the other critical component of this is that the rest between sets should not be more than a minute, right? We're training our body to continuously do this movement over and over and over and over and over. That is essentially the goal here, right? That's truly the goal of what we're doing here. While it's got a lot of other benefits like losing weight, burning a lot of calories quickly, and then obviously being good at repeating a movement, the goal here is primarily to be able to execute over a long period of time. So, so those are the three types of training we've got, right? These are again flexible, and you can switch them out, and you can be on one cycle and then switch to another. It's very common. It's something that I do with my clients. Um,
Just to add here, Tony, on the last slide, you mentioned about endurance. If somebody's a beginner and they start with, let's say, some body weight exercise and they do an endurance training program to lose fat, it might happen that they will also build some muscle at the same time. So
Certainly.
even though they're using that type of training, it might happen that some of the fat will turn into muscle, especially if they're in a beginner stage at their fitness journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, the next slide covers that a little bit.
Okay.
Um, so good, really good comment though, because there's a lot of things to consider, right? So regardless of which style of lifting or training that you fall into or end up um, following, there are variables. So there's a lot of things to consider, right? So the type of training you choose is going to have an impact on your goals, but there's still so many other variables. The biggest one, in my opinion, by far, is your diet, your nutrition, right? So a lot of what you do is going to a lot of what you do in the gym is going to affect where you're trying to go. But if your diet is not on point, then it may mean nothing at all, right? You might just be smoking yourself at the gym for no reason. Recovery is important. Your general level of activity is important. Your experience in fitness is important. Um, so I just made a couple examples here. If you're training to grow muscle, you're probably going to need more calories and protein. And if you're trying to lose weight, you're probably going to be in a caloric deficit while you're doing any of these programs. And neither one of these things is necessarily a key component to the program, but it's something that you absolutely need to consider. And so, to your point, you can absolutely get to where you're going, or at least part of the way, even if you're on the wrong program, right? You're probably not going to make it all the way to be a professional power lifter if you're doing 20 reps of everything. Likewise, you might not lose a lot of weight if you're doing one rep of everything, but they're all going to benefit you one way or another, right? So I really like what you said, because I think the key here to remember is do something. Like if you don't know which one to pick, maybe you're not even sure of which goal you want to follow. I do have people who I speak with regularly who say things like, I'm really not that concerned with how I look. I don't necessarily want to gain a bunch of muscle. I want to be healthy. I want to live a long time. I want to, be at my kid's wedding and things like that. And so I say, okay, perfect, cool. So let's pick something that's going to be not too much of a shock for you, not too intense for you, since the goal isn't I really, really, really want to be like Mr. Olympia or something, right? If it's a little more of a neutral goal, then yes, you can definitely pick one of these and you're gonna see benefits that maybe one of the other programs would have been better at, but it's not going to eliminate the potential for losing fat just because you're powerlifting.
Exactly. And another component for your training, if you are, as you said, a regular guy who just wants to be healthy. We're done with the presentation, by the way.
That's it. That's it.
That's it. Okay. Just some closing comment before I let you go. Um, as you said, the average person doesn't want to look like Schwarzenegger. They don't want to compete athletically. So they just want to be fit, healthy vegans, just be a positive member of the community, showing non-vegans that you can be healthy and fit, right? And that example that you used, I want to be around for my kids, also resonates with me. Um, so you have to make your training style, whatever you choose, sustainable and fun, so you can do it for a long time, right, for the rest of your life.
Yes, and actually, I'll tell a really quick story. Um, a few years ago, I was I was doing something I call ego lifting, right? It was powerlifting officially, but it wasn't very good. And I didn't put together all of the components. I didn't consider all of the variables that I needed to effectively powerlift. And so what was happening was my strength was increasing. That was the goal. Um, but it was kind of like a balance situation. I was way out of balance. I wasn't eating properly. I was eating like high octane trash. I wasn't resting properly. Full disclosure, my libido was way down because I was just so smoked and so drained, right? So there's certain trainings that are completely unnecessary to follow, right? I wasn't looking to compete in a strongman or anything. I just wasn't really sure what to follow. And I ended up going down a path that really wasn't right for me, right? So while you can choose something that it's going to benefit you in one way or another, like I said, I was getting a lot stronger. It is important to kind of, hone in on what you're looking to do. And in this case, like I said, I wasn't choosing effectively, and there's definitely side effects to whatever program you decide to go with. So it's important to kind of know what you're getting yourself into.
Cool. Amazing, amazing. All right, so that's it for Tony. Very nice presentation, man, and I love the topic and how you broke it down in simple terms for the people that are watching this video. I think they will find it very useful, and that will help them go after, as you said, um, after they leave this video with a better understanding if they're not going to hire somebody to help them with their fitness goals, to just put together a training program that at least matches what you want to do. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, thank you again for having me back on your channel here, and this was a lot of fun. Hope to do it again sometime.
Cool, cool.